What if the greatest performances in film history were born not from talent alone, but from pain, identity loss, and psychological sacrifice? Method acting has given audiences unforgettable characters, performances so real they feel alive. But behind that realism lies a darker truth that rarely makes it to the screen. For some actors, fully becoming a character doesn't end when the cameras stop rolling. It follows them home. It changes how they think, how they behave, and sometimes how they survive. This video examines the hidden cost of method acting, not as myth or rumor, but through real stories of legendary performers who pushed themselves beyond safe limits. Actors who didn't just play someone else, but slowly erased themselves in the process. From Daniel Day-Lewis disappearing into his roles for years, to Jim Carrey losing his sense of identity, to James Gandolfini and Heath Ledger struggling under the psychological weight of characters they could not easily escape. We will look at where dedication ends and self-destruction begins. The question is not whether method acting creates great art. The question is, how much of yourself can you give away before there is nothing left to return to? At its core, method acting is not about pretending, it is about inhabiting. Traditional actors rely on technique, voice training, physical transformation, emotional recall, and controlled performance. They step into a role when the camera rolls, and they step out when the scene ends. Method actors do not see that boundary as real. The philosophy behind method acting comes from the belief that emotions cannot be convincingly faked. To portray pain, you must feel pain. To portray obsession, you must live inside obsession. The character is not something you perform, it is something you become. And once that belief takes hold, stepping out of the role can feel dishonest, even impossible. This approach has produced some of the most powerful performances in film history, but it also creates a dangerous assumption that suffering equals authenticity, that the more you damage yourself emotionally or psychologically, the more real your performance becomes. This is where method acting begins to turn destructive. When actors stay in character off-set, refuse to break psychological patterns, or deliberately expose themselves to emotional trauma, they are not rehearsing anymore. They are conditioning their minds. Over time, the brain stops recognizing where the character ends and the person begins. Identity becomes flexible. Boundaries weaken. Psychologists describe this as dissociation, the mind separating from its stable sense of self. In short bursts, dissociation can help artists access creativity. Over long periods, it becomes destabilizing. The actor may struggle to return to normal emotional regulation. Relationships suffer. Substance use becomes a coping mechanism. Sleep breaks down. Anxiety increases. What makes this especially dangerous is that the film industry often rewards this behavior. Awards, praise, box office success, all reinforce the idea that extreme sacrifice is not only acceptable, but necessary. The more an actor disappears into a role, the more the audience applauds. The problem is simple. Art ends. The human mind does not always reset. To understand how this plays out in real life, we need to look at the actor most often praised for mastering the method, Daniel Day-Lewis. Daniel Day-Lewis is often described as the greatest method actor of all time, not because he exaggerates emotion, but because he erases the distance between himself and the character completely. When Day-Lewis accepts a role, he does not prepare for it, he moves into it. For My Left Foot, he portrayed Christy Brown, an Irish writer with cerebral palsy. To understand the role, Day-Lewis spent extensive time with people living with the condition, not as research, but as immersion. Once filming began, he refused to leave the character. He remained in a wheelchair throughout production. Crew members fed him. They moved him from place to place. He spoke only as Christy Brown. On screen, the performance was extraordinary. Off-screen, it was exhausting for everyone involved. Co-actors described the experience as unsettling, yet the industry rewarded the result. Day-Lewis won his first Academy Award. The message was clear. This level of sacrifice works. And he did not stop. For The Crucible, he built a 17th century home using period-accurate tools and lived in it without modern utilities. For The Last of the Mohicans, he refused to eat food unless he personally hunted it. For There Will Be Blood, he stayed immersed in the mindset of a ruthless, isolated man driven by ambition and rage. To Day-Lewis, this was not performance, it was necessity. He has stated openly that without full immersion, he does not believe he can act truthfully. In his view, stepping out of the character would break the psychological continuity required to tell the story honestly. What separates Day-Lewis from many other method actors is not the extremity of his process, but his ability to withdraw. Between films, he disappears. Months, sometimes years, pass without public appearances. He does not stack roles back to back. He allows his identity to rebuild. This withdrawal is not indulgence, it is survival. Even so, Day-Lewis has admitted that acting takes a severe emotional toll. He has spoken about the need to distance himself from the profession entirely to remain grounded. His approach works only because he recognizes the danger and steps away before the role consumes him completely. Many method actors are not so disciplined. For some, the boundary between character and self does not quietly dissolve. It collapses. And when that happens, the consequences are no longer controlled or reversible. That collapse became painfully visible during the filming of Man on the Moon, when Jim Carrey stopped playing Andy Kaufman and began believing he was Andy Kaufman. Jim Carrey was already one of the most recognizable entertainers in the world when he agreed to portray Andy Kaufman in Man on the Moon. By the late 1990s, Carrey had achieved what most performers never do: global fame, financial security, and creative freedom. What he did not have was a stable sense of self. Unlike Daniel Day-Lewis, Carrey never formally identified as a method actor. Yet for this role, he crossed far deeper psychological territory than many who openly embraced the method. Andy Kaufman was not just a character Carrey admired. He was a personal idol, an artist who blurred reality and performance until no clear boundary existed. To portray Kaufman honestly, Carrey believed he had to erase himself before filming even began. Carrey described feeling Andy Kaufman's presence guiding his decisions. He spoke openly about believing Kaufman was communicating with him, influencing his thoughts, and steering his behavior. What began as intense identification soon turned into psychological surrender. Once on set, Carrey refused to be addressed by his real name. He responded only as Andy Kaufman, or as Kaufman's alter ego, Tony Clifton. He behaved unpredictably, disrupted production, and treated cast and crew with hostility. These were not calculated performances. They were expressions of a man who no longer felt anchored to his own identity. For months, everyone around him was forced to interact not with Jim Carrey, but with a recreation of a dead artist. The experience was deeply unsettling. Some cast members described it as unbearable. Others felt trapped, unsure whether confronting Carrey would break the illusion he insisted was necessary. What makes this case especially disturbing is that Carrey did not fully understand what he was losing until it was gone. He later admitted that by the end of filming, he struggled to locate himself psychologically. The character had not simply influenced him, it had replaced him. Carrey eventually emerged from the experience, but not unchanged. He began publicly questioning the concept of identity itself, stating that the self is an illusion and that personalities are performances we cling to. Whether philosophical awakening or psychological defense, the shift was permanent. This is the danger few discuss openly. Method acting can create performances so convincing that the actor no longer knows who is being convinced. And when that confusion meets unstable personalities, power dynamics, or unchecked behavior, the harm does not stop with the actor. Sometimes, it spills outward, onto others. That line was crossed during Val Kilmer's transformation into Jim Morrison. Val Kilmer entered the doors at the height of his career. He was disciplined, respected, and known for intense preparation. To portray Jim Morrison convincingly, Kilmer committed to full physical and psychological transformation. He memorized dozens of songs. He trained his voice to match Morrison's tone. He studied his posture, his movement, his volatility. But Kilmer did not stop at imitation. To capture Morrison's unpredictability, he began living as Morrison, adopting his behavior, his recklessness, and his disregard for boundaries. This decision raises a critical issue rarely addressed in discussions about method acting. Authenticity does not excuse harm. Jim Morrison was not simply a gifted musician. He was also deeply troubled, aggressive, and often abusive. By choosing to embody everything Morrison represented, Kilmer blurred the line between portraying dysfunction and reproducing it. Allegations later emerged that during auditions and rehearsals, Kilmer engaged in physical behavior that left a young actress traumatized. While accounts of the incident vary, what remains undeniable is that method acting created a professional environment where extreme conduct was tolerated or dismissed as part of the role. This is where method acting becomes ethically dangerous, when actors justify harmful behavior as necessary for the performance. Accountability weakens. Directors, Producers and crew may hesitate to intervene, especially when money and reputation are at stake. The actor's suffering becomes framed as dedication. The discomfort of others becomes collateral damage. Kilmer reportedly required therapy after the role. Whether or not every allegation is interpreted the same way, the pattern is familiar. Replacing one identity with another for extended periods destabilizes behavior. Emotional regulation erodes. Boundaries collapse. The irony is that audiences rarely see this cost. They see the final performance, not the chaos required to produce it. They celebrate the realism without questioning the process. And this is not limited to film sets. Psychologists have documented similar identity loss in professions that require sustained role immersion, such as undercover law enforcement. Officers who remain in character for months or years often struggle with reintegration. The violence they witness is not always the most damaging factor. The true crisis comes from losing a stable sense of self. Actors face the same risk, but without institutional psychological safeguards. This brings us to a performer whose work changed television forever, but whose internal struggle remained largely hidden until it was too late. James Gandolfini. James Gandolfini did not look like a revolutionary figure in television when he was cast as Tony Soprano. He was not a traditional leading man. He was heavy-set, soft-spoken off camera, and deeply private. But when he stepped into the role, he created one of the most complex and disturbing characters ever put on screen. Tony Soprano was not a typical crime boss. He was violent, manipulative, emotionally fragile, and constantly at war with himself. He murdered without hesitation, yet panicked over ducks in his swimming pool. He sought therapy, but used self-awareness as another tool for control, to make this character believable. Gandolfini did not rely on surface-level acting. He absorbed Tony's contradictions into his own emotional system. At first, his method was subtle. He stayed in character between takes. He maintained Tony's physical posture and intimidating presence. But as the series progressed and the character darkened, Gandolfini's process became more extreme. He deliberately deprived himself of sleep. He binge-ate to mirror Tony's self-destructive habits. He physically hurt himself to generate rage before scenes. Simple but dangerous techniques meant to force emotional authenticity. The result was mesmerizing television. Tony Soprano felt real because Gandolfini allowed himself to feel everything Tony felt. Paranoia, guilt, hunger, lust, fear, and cruelty. But that realism came at a personal cost. Behind the scenes, Gandolfini struggled with substance abuse. Alcohol and drugs became coping mechanisms, not indulgences. He arrived late to set. Production schedules were disrupted. HBO executives and cast members attempted interventions. But Gandolfini resisted. In his mind, stepping back meant weakening the character. What made this especially painful is that Gandolfini was not Tony Soprano in real life. Friends and co-stars described him as gentle, generous, and deeply uncomfortable with the admiration Tony received. Fans idolized a man he found morally repulsive. That dissonance, being praised for embodying something you personally reject, creates psychological strain few people can withstand. Over time, the role consumed him. His marriage suffered, his health deteriorated, and although it would be dishonest to blame method acting alone for his early death, it is impossible to ignore the role it played in amplifying destructive patterns. Gandolfini gave audiences one of the greatest performances in television history. But the question remains, was the price too high? That question became unavoidable after another legendary performance, one that redefined a character forever and reignited public fear about method acting itself. That performance belonged to Heath Ledger. Heath Ledger's portrayal of the Joker in The Dark Knight is often cited as the most dangerous example of method acting, not only because the performance was transformative, but because Ledger died shortly after completing the film. In the public imagination, the conclusion came quickly and emotionally. The role destroyed him. The truth is more complex and more instructive. Ledger was not an unstable outsider when he took on the Joker. He was a respected actor who had already proven his emotional range in films like Brokeback Mountain. What drew him to the Joker was not chaos for its own sake, but the character's philosophical emptiness. This Joker was not comedic. He represented nihilism, violence without motive, cruelty without meaning. To prepare, Ledger isolated himself in a hotel room for weeks. He experimented with voices, posture, and movement. He kept a journal filled with disturbing images and thoughts, not as indulgence, but as a way to understand the character's psychology. On set, he pushed himself physically, throwing his body into walls, demanding realism in fight scenes, refusing to soften the portrayal. The result was unforgettable. The Joker did not feel acted. He felt alive. But here is where myth overtook reality. Ledger had struggled with insomnia for years, long before The Dark Knight. To cope, he relied on prescription medication. After finishing The Joker, he immediately moved into another demanding role without rest, something most experienced method actors avoid. His death was ruled an accidental overdose caused by a dangerous combination of legally prescribed drugs. There's no medical evidence that the Joker made him insane. But there is a clear lesson. Extreme psychological immersion combined with physical exhaustion and chemical dependency is a lethal combination. Ledger did not die because he played the Joker. He died because he never fully disengaged, mentally, physically, or emotionally, before demanding more of himself. His death became a symbol not of method acting's inevitability, but of its risk when boundaries are ignored. Method acting has given us some of the most powerful performances ever captured on film. Characters that feel real, emotions that cut deep, stories that stay with us long after the screen goes dark. There is no denying its artistic impact. But when we step back and look at the full picture, a hard truth emerges. Again and again, we see the same pattern: extreme immersion, blurred identity, psychological strain, and lasting damage. Daniel Day-Lewis survives his process only because he withdraws completely between roles. Jim Carrey lost his sense of self and never fully returned to who he was before. Val Kilmer's dedication raised serious ethical concerns. James Gandolfini carried the weight of Tony Soprano until it crushed his personal life. Heath Ledger pushed forward without rest, and the cost was irreversible. These are not isolated cases. They are warnings. The entertainment industry often celebrates suffering as proof of authenticity. Awards reward sacrifice. Audiences praise realism. But rarely do we ask what happens to the person behind the performance. We applaud the disappearance of the actor into the role, without considering what it takes to come back. Great art should challenge the artist, but it should not destroy them. So here's the question worth leaving open. If a performance is unforgettable, but the person creating it is permanently changed or lost, was the cost justified? And as viewers, are we complicit when we reward that sacrifice without questioning the damage behind it? Share your thoughts. Where should the line be drawn between dedication and self-destruction?